After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
Back up to... To be honest, I might have to upload this like as soon as we're done. I'm terrified of what new crazy update's about to happen.
I feel ya.
Yeah, I don't know. Between like just I don't know if this is just you, but like everyone I know seems to have like less free time on hand. And at the same time, like I feel like the quality of what we've been able to do for the podcast has gotten elevated in terms of like the discussions we can have, but then on the flip side, like we both just have less free time to
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
which is not a problem, right? I don't think we need to have like the latest emergency podcast, approach to anything.
Right.
But yeah, it has been quite some time since the last episode, and a lot. I mean a lot has happened. I kind of have like an arm's distance away from the online discourse, but what's been going on? Because it's been a busy week or a busy month at least, between like election fallout, just again like fall of Syria, United Healthcare CEO shooting, and like the Trump cabinet picks. It's been a wild week for news heads, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's it's been a wild month. I mean, I would say we've finally hit the point where the election fallout is hitting a place that I'm maybe more comfortable with, right? Where like I think for a long time, and you haven't been as online by your own admission, like you might not have been exposed to this, but like on there's been like a push kind of like in the media and kind of in like the general online space of like, oh, like kind of giving Trump a chance and stuff like that, which is like, again, it's like kind of like, let's just collectively erase that like this man has been president before, that he's not exactly a unpredictable loose cannon. I mean, he sort of is, but like it's not like oh, who knows if he'll actually follow through on anything. It's like we kind of have a general pattern of behavior. He's almost certainly going to at least try. And the cabinet picks, I think, have highlighted some of that. Where yeah, like these are people who are choices.
To say the
right?
least.
And I think that it's kind of it's undermined the sort of faux populist, more charitable readings people were giving of him. That it's clear that like he's willing to sort of throw our institutions under the bus, but not in a way that's like productive, right?
Yeah.
That our institutions are tremendously flawed. It's a big part of how I present a lot of my classes, which are on the political institutions, right? Is like there are some serious issues that like we probably need to reconcile with at some point. Will we? Probably not, but I have some hopes for the future. But like it's like here that's not what you get out of him, right? You get how can I like bend these to like the maximal benefit for like me and fellow upper class citizens, and that's what we're seeing with a lot of these cabinet picks. There was a Meet the Press interview he had, I think this weekend, where I'm starting to see a shift in the media coverage from there, where um they asked him about healthcare and stuff like that, and it's still concepts of a plan. He has doubled down on like every like crazy, dumb, out of touch thing he said. There was one quote where he's talking about how he I have to read it because it's just so preposterous. And I think it highlights like the extent to which he is just deeply out of touch. I won on groceries. Very simple word, groceries. Like almost, who uses the word? I started using the word, the groceries. When you buy apples, when you buy bacon, when you buy eggs, they would double and triple the price over a short period of time. So obviously talking about inflation, but the idea, like again, that like this is someone who's like, oh, I've never used the word groceries before. What
It's
the
funny how
fuck?
that's because I recall him like doing this weird waxing poetic thing about eggs and breakfast, like leading
And
up to the
bacon has been
election.
like the
R-
consistent, like it's
Class
always the bacon.
classic old man shit. Classic old man shit to like rant about like continental breakfast. But there's something to that, right? Where it's like a lot of like and let's maybe take a second to talk about this like faux populism that's kind of emerged as like a dual smear and like obfuscation or co-optation of like popular frustrations and discontentment with American like institutions at least since 2016, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, a common refrain I hear from some liberal commentators these days is like, "I hope it was worth it for some eggs." Like, and it's kind of become like a weird shorthand.
Yeah.
And then like Republicans are also co-opting like concerns about the cost of everyday goods into like they want to pay for trans people instead of and raise the price of groceries
Yeah.
type weird type of shit, right? Wh- I'm I feel like I understood where this came from, and at the same time, I'm kind of flummoxed by it. Do you care to comment on this?
So, I mean, I'll be honest, like the eggs thing has been like kind of just within my circles has been like, yeah, like let's just double down on this. Like let's make fun of these people over it because it's I think that for a lot of folks in like the liberal left space broadly are kind of just like Schadenfreud's all we got.
Right.
Um post election, right? Like there's
I mean,
and
to some
I
extent, I've also seen that applied. So it's like, guess they're gonna bomb Gaza, and it's like they were already doing that. Hold up, like, why are you
right,
laughing
yeah,
about this?
it's and I think that kind of I mean Gaza I've got some other comments on too. Not but there
Right,
hasn't
right,
really been any like news on it, but like it does tie into I think where maybe like the broader projects are on in the movements are I think, but like I think there's and I on the Gaza thing I know a lot of people are really frustrated with like Dearborn, right, where it's like I think had Dearborn gone for Stein outright I would I mean personally I would have had a lot more respect for it too. But going for Trump, it's kind of like, there's like that I think has led into that narrative a bit. Again, like, were they a deciding factor in this election? Absolutely not. But
exactly.
I think that there's, that's the more like malicious one. The egg stuff, I don't really have a problem with it. Like, it's kind of like, yeah, like it's, you know, I had joked in class, maybe I shouldn't have, that like the median voter is probably someone who'd willing to like blood sacrifice their neighbors to drop the price of eggs a couple cents. Um, and turns out I was correct. You know, you try not to project the outcomes you don't want into the world, but maybe I did a little on that. But I think I don't know, it's like I'm fundamental like, and it's like a lot of these things too, it's like you get the sense that when people are talking about like inflation as an issue, which it is, right? The
Right.
cost of everyday goods is a problem, but it's for me, it's kind of entered the territory that like an issue like um I don't know, like people are concerned about government corruption, right? It's so corrupt that Biden would another current event that we didn't put on the outline, pardon his son, right?
See, I
It's
didn't put it on the outline
corrupt.
because that's how much I don't care. But you're right.
Right,
Like,
and I don't
absolutely.
either, but, like but where people are like, "Oh, this is, like, the height of c political corruption," or people who are concerned about, the opioid epidemic or,
Hmm.
sex trafficking, the Epstein list, all that stuff. Usually when I hear people talk about that, not always, but oftentimes, I know that I'm in for, like, a deeply unserious conversation. Where it's just like, that they're using these issues to sort of co-opt, kind of like co-opt interest for like the dumbest projects imaginable, right? Like, and most times someone that's like in like a public figure message mentions like the Epstein list or sex trafficking abroad, they're talking about like Bill Clinton and like some weird conspiracy theories about Hollywood elites, bathing in the blood of virgins. They're not talking about like the real scope of those things, or like, purposely obfuscating the way it incriminates some of their own. Same with like the opioid epidemic and whatnot, where it's like, oh, it's a way that we can sort of talk about how the border is the problem, that we're
Right.
letting drugs and poison across the border, and it's not that like there's any that we have no culpability for this. It's entirely a quote unquote invasion from the South, and I think inflation has kind of hit that too, where like there's just especially and again, I think Democrats really failed to capitalize on the idea that like, hey, the Trump tariffs are going to radically raise prices.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
in that Meet the Press interview, they had asked him like, "Can you promise that prices won't go increase?" He's like, "Oh, I can't." But I think, and kind of to my initial point about that interview is, I think that like it's finally like reoccurred to people that we elected a moron who has no like real solutions. And I think that like the charitable like honeymoon phase is already coming to an end. I don't think it's totally ended yet, but I think that like people are kind of like slowly realizing this. I don't know to the extent that the right will ever truly experience buyer's remorse. I'm sure they can come up with a million scapegoats to explain away any misfortune that occurs under the Trump term that has nothing to do with him. Um, but that's just kind of, I think, where we are broadly.
Hmm. Um, I kind of I've been, at least like Luno, paying attention to the podcast scape a little bit, so that's kept me tied to the discourse at least a little bit. And
Probably
I've
hasn't helped your sanity.
um there's multiple other things in that mix. I would not singularly blame political discourse as the unilateral cause for my cognitive decline. However, uh, maybe for Joe Biden, he could cite that. However, so um, something that like just keeps coming up to me, at least, is in that same vein of faux populism. There's also this highly out of touch, for opposite reasons, technocratic class within the Democratic Party that, like, I don't even know if calling them technocratic is even correct at this point, but so out of touch with.
Soulless. Yeah.
I mean,
I
soulless would still, imply a degree of competency in this case. It's like they saw, you know, Kamala eat shit on election day and are like, she ran a flawless campaign, that type of stuff, right? The
which is
kind of,
insane.
the kind of like, we didn't know how to message this. You guys who insisted that like you're the only ones who get to talk to voters, that any other form of policy or any other proposals can't exist, can't work. It's got to be you guys. You
So
failed. That's been like particularly frustrating to look at, where it's like, especially if you've been looking at Pod Save America on every episode now, just snitch on themselves, you know?
So did they? Was it Pod Save that had? I can't remember her name. It's the form. It's like the person who was like on Biden's team and then on Harris's
Yes.
team. Where
Yes.
okay, yes. So the craziest thing to me, and like to the extent that I think that like the general philosophy that these people have is valid. Not that they themselves are. I mean, like I guess they're as valid as any human life, but not that they're valid in like their profession, right? But like in terms of like their contributions to the discourse, that I think that there's any value that they have is like the idea that like messaging is important. However, for people who subscribe to that philosophy that messaging is important, maybe it's what matters more than policy at the end of the day. These people are horrible
Yeah.
at messaging. Maybe, I mean, horrible might be a generous description, because the part that from that interview that really drove me insane was the like we tried to tell a story that she was different
That
from
was
Biden.
that was driving me insane every time they
And
said
like a
that.
story which inherently kind of like, I mean I guess you can have a true story, right? But like, it's like when I hear story, I kind of think you're building a narrative that isn't necessarily like the facts, right?
I mean, in our, election reactions episode, right? Like,
Hmm.
'cause that's what drove me mad because in a way they are telling on themselves. Yes, they did tell a story, and it was a fantasy where Kamala builds this big tent with like the daughter of Dick Cheney
And Cheney,
and Cheney
right? Dick
himself,
Cheney
right?
was
And
Dick
like
Cheney
and like
was part of what one of my students has called throughout the election the Coconut Coalition.
right,
Um,
right. Which is again like it's based on these like very selective forced imaginations of like these narrow escapes from death, right? Like the fact that there was, and I don't know how seriously anyone can take polls anymore, right? But it's like you go from anybody but Biden to then just eating shit, right? Like what kind of mystical thinking were you employing to get yourself from point A to point B? If that's the case, then yeah, you were trying to tell a story and it was a shit one.
well, and the thing is, that there was like they were trying to tell a story specifically in the vein of separating her from Biden, because clearly, like
Did
that was
they?
that was the thing. But that's what she said, and that's why I was like, that is like so. I mean, obviously, there's the issue of like just the story element of it, but like there is no evidence that they really even attempted that. And they're like, like we didn't want it specific. She didn't like. It's like, okay, well, like how do you tell a story? Like a story is not the cover page. A story is some like carefully crafted narrative that clearly never emerged. The story they were trying to tell that you alluded to, kind of like more broadly, right, was this big tent coalition. And is it a big tent? Sure, but it's a big tent that has like a bunch of holes in it, right? There's like water is coming through this tent. We're exposed to the elements. There's not, it's like there's some massive holes in it. This is not a sustainable tent, right? This is, you're better off just, standing out there in the rain. Um, and like the Cheney stuff, like, and I thought that like, maybe Dick was a useful prop in as much as
Mhm.
showing that like this is how insane the Republican Party is that, you know, Dick Cheney, the personification, the chief advocate for like the unitary executive theory, thinks that Trump is going too far in destroying democracy. Like I think that's like a powerful-ish story, but it's also probably one more for like more sophisticated voters than what they necessarily were catering to.
And
And
by sophisticated, a very specific cohort. That's the other thing.
exactly. Yeah, a very specific cohort who, let's face it, was already going to vote for Biden or Harris or whoever the Democratic nominee
Right.
was, whoever wasn't Trump. Um, and increasingly, because I've had some conversations with some folks who, I don't know how they voted exactly. I
Mhm.
have my suspicions, but it occurred to me like where I was like kind of thinking some of the conversations that I had had with them, where it was like, okay, you kind of are like the anecdotal like synthesis of everything that we've like that's been proven wrong about the Democratic strategy, because you consistently talked about how like inoffensive the Harris campaign was, how like, oh yeah, it'd be fine if she was president, and how every time it was like Trump was like grabbing defeat out of the jaws of victory with every stupid thing he said. But at the end of the day, you're still happy that he won. Maybe you directly supported that. Um, Whatever. Either way, it just shows that there's not like it's just another sort of piece of evidence that like this strategy of trying to woo these Republican voters, it isn't sustainable.
It,
Um,
it's it's
we've
not,
seen the
and
data, we've seen the anecdotes. There's nothing that like bears it out in the aggregate.
there isn't, especially when, and again, like I'm not trying to relitigate the election, but it's like if you just consider how low turnout was, not just in the sense of how low it was for the Democrats this time, but even among the votes Trump got, Trump underperformed. If you just
Sure.
think in sheer terms, like the amount of people who refused to show up to the polls, right? Like if being inoffensive was all it took to get people to vote, that has been proven wrong time and time again. But to that end as well, um, for them to have basically this bizarre conciliatory mess where they're still mad at Trump, but then in the same breath, talking about conceding, talking about pardoning Trump, and
Yeah.
furthermore, like this whole pattern of shifting right, running to the right on immigration, the Democratic Party that at least nominally had stances on climate, that had stances on trans rights, had stances on all these issues, right? Is increasingly, running rightwards. And I would argue to the extent that like this give Trump a chance thing, is being expressed by the commentariat, you're seeing it to some extent in like from Democratic lawmakers. It's not all of them, but it's going to
Yeah.
be that problem cohort that's going to shape how these votes are going to take place in the upcoming congressional terms. So it's worrisome. And the example that's been stuck in my mind, because we've talked about this on the show before, other academics and commentators have spoken on this, which is like the Israelification of US politics. And what I mean by that is like you have an ever shifting rightward Overton window in Israeli politics. And you basically have two right wing parties, the difference being one is like ultra right and the other is like liberal-ish, but not really, right? So what
Yeah,
does
I
what
mean,
what does that engender, right? I don't know.
yeah, I mean the kind of the Overton window on is Israel has shrunk. I mean, we're looking out at like like a little cubbyhole in this country when it comes to it. Like you have, obviously some politicians who are a little different, but like, and I mean, to the extent that I mean, there's always at least some conciliatory of like they have the right to exist, they have the right to defend themselves. You've heard the line a million times. That was always like the baseline standard, but like increasingly there has been um, a lot of issues there, and then that kind of relates to sort of the broader point that I wanted to make with the pardon as well. The
Yeah.
suggestion that Democrats should pardon Trump. A bit of context is like obviously this is kind of styled off of the Ford pardoning Nixon, right? This was an act to heal the country. At the time, and some people still sort of buy the idea this was like a corrupt bargain. Personally, I don't. I think the desire to heal was genuine, and I think that it is this time, but I also just think it's fundamentally misguided. I personally look back at the pardon of Nixon over Watergate as like sort of this kind of death knell in the coffin for like faith in our institutions. Watergate itself was damaging, but I think pardoning Nixon has had disastrous consequences in the
Right.
long term when it comes to holding any elected official accountable. You know, no one bought that Trump was actually going to face legal ramifications for his actions, unless they were kind of, I mean, I hate the term, but if they were blue MAGA, they probably thought that he was actually going to go to jail at some point. Um, I figured the most punishment he was ever going to get was like house arrest in Mar-a-Lago. Um, the entire course, not just his room. Um, I didn't think he was ever going to face serious repercussions. But the idea that you should pardon him, I think would be like the death knell of the Democratic Party. And kind of by extension, like any type of political left wing movement in this country. Whatever, we can debate whether or not the Democrats Party is the place for that. But I know that, we've had discussions in this Discord broadly of, is it, can we work within the party to achieve more left wing outcomes, or do we have to like work outside it? And this, I think, would be the death knell of being able to work within it. And I think that
Hmm.
personally, working outside it, at least electorally, is a completely non-viable strategy that will take at best generations to accomplish anything over problems that are, quite immediate. So generally not viable in my opinion. And I think, you just look at the most recent election, right? We're talking about turnout. I looked this up ahead of time. Any guess how Jill Stein and the Green Party did in the context of an election where the Democratic Party is barely running on anything, that everyone's outraged about a genocide and all of these other problems with the party?
I don't recall what the exact figure was, but I think I remember saying that even if you added every third party candidate's vote totals to Kamala's vote total, it still would not put her in close to a tie with Trump. That's how
Yeah.
low it is.
Yeah. 0.5% of the electorate voted for the Green Party. For context, she got 8,000 more votes than RFK Jr., who had ostensibly dropped out of the race and had gotten his name removed off several ballots.
And I think that's the whole point here, right? And I think people mistake this, what we're doing, with the doom and gloom or like needless pessimism. I think a lot of people kind of need to understand you do need to grapple with what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And let's I mean, it's about, like, we've been saying this on the podcast for its entire run at this point. I'll say it again. It's high time we continue to examine these repeat failures. If you think 2016 was a failure, you need to look back at other losses, and you need to
Yeah.
accept that, like, the left has been housebroken, right? And that term is kind of humiliating to use, but at the same time, like, isn't that kind of what happened with, like, the deal Labor made after after World War II, and it didn't pan out for them? Like, there's a history behind
Sure.
why the left isn't where we want it to be. And increasingly, I think a lot of people will come into this and they think, well, why aren't we trying hard enough? And it's like, people have given their lives to this, right? And it's like,
And for minimal rewards. Like,
right,
not to be doom
right.
and gloom about it, but like that's kind of, and I think a lot of people are sick, especially more recently, of fighting the same battles, fighting the battles that their parents and grandparents fought.
Right.
Um,
And
Students will tell me that, like, oh, hey, my grandmother talked about, how she used to, like, she was, there for like the first, like, abortion activists, and she's
mhm.
just baffled. It's like, yeah, I mean,
Which is part of the whole nature of this, right? Is like, expect not to see change in your lifetime. Expect to sacrifice a lot. Expect to lose a lot. If you cannot stomach the idea of losing, or you think losing inherently makes you wrong, you're not going to make it. And I don't think that, because a lot of people do this bullshit too, where, like, they face one defeat or they get proven wrong about an outcome, and then they just run to the right immediately. Like, that also is an attitude I find to be juvenile. But
I think
it's
that's like kind of part of the like we must find a left Joe Rogan type thing, because I feel like that's very much like that audience is like the personification of that.
you could, I mean, I'll say it this way, right? Where it's like, you get your left Joe Rogan, and then what?
Sure, but I meant like the current, like, where like that Rogan audience, like the podcast audience that like they feel they need to capture. I think that is like that audience, right? Is it's like the ones that like they faced failure once and they just drifted to the right.
Yeah. I mean, those people too, but even then, like, I'm also just
But yeah,
thinking
I
about
agree.
the
Like,
grifters within our space and all that. Like, there
right.
there is a juvenile attitude towards that, and it's you know,
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And like as I said, that was a good segue into that. But my overarching point with why I think it's like the death of the party if they opt to
yes, yes.
pardon Trump is like because it either says one of two things. And I mean, you were kind of talking a little bit about this with like the people see like if you lose once that's wrong, but like the party, if it does this especially, is like casting itself as like, and I think it's historically done this where it treats losing as a virtue. That losing is,
Mhm.
maybe not necessarily the goal, right? I mean, certainly some of us are cynical enough to believe that it is, but it's that like it's like there's virtue in losing, and you have to be graceful in defeat. You have to be conciliatory in defeat, even to the detriment of the broader goals of your movement. And in particular, it's like, what you achieve by pardoning Trump is one of two things. One, as the party that ran, with like the one cohesive message, generally being that your opponent is Adolf Hitler, come back,
Right.
back from the dead. You have either conceded that you openly lied about that, which I don't really think they did, but you openly lied about that, or you just don't care. That you don't care that the country elected Hitler, and what you care more about is the idea that we like maintain some semblance of norms in as far as the fact that elected officials generally, you know, can do things consequence free, that there's no like real human cost to policy, that it's all sort of um a sporting event, that there are, winners and losers, and maybe you'll do better off next season, rather than the fact that there's actually, real ramifications for people who are outside of your class, in particular, who
Hmm.
are going to be impacted by that election.
Exactly. It's it's incredibly bothersome, and also I kind of do want to just delve into that a little bit, because this, what I like to call, the within the liberal mind, I can only consider this to be Schrodinger's consciousness, right? Where what their level of concern, or their degree of concern, is either non-existent or it's at 100. So I can recall, I mean, I recall this, viscerally, and tell me if I'm off base here, but like after Charlottesville, that's how long ago I remember noticing this. There was a pronounced, alarm and outcry about the resurgence of neo-Nazis, the resurgence of far-right
Yeah.
politics, the resurgence of fascist tendencies, specifically from the left, right? And especially after,
Mhm.
they killed Heather Heyer, right? Like,
Yeah.
a lot of people were like, okay, we got to do something about, and that like led to the resurgence of things like Antifa, and like it kind of fed further into the resurgence of, like, or at least a resurgent interest in left-wing politics in the US. But I recall very heavy-handed editorials or direct conversations I had with self-identified liberals and centrists this time, who were like, you're overstating it, it's not fascism, get over it.
Yeah.
And then when the tables were turned for whatever reason, I can't recall, like it must have been like the middle of the Trump term, suddenly they're like sounding the alarm on, like, guys, Trump is a fascist. And I couldn't help but just feel like, where were you in 2016? Come on. And
Yeah,
I'm wondering if you're noticing that or not, like.
and I mean that kind of connects to like where we started this conversation today
Right.
too, right? Is like the idea that there's mixed levels of the seriousness that people are taking this, and I think you're right. Like I'm definitely seeing it. Like I don't take any joy in it. Um,
Right.
like I don't take any, because I didn't take any joy in it then either. Like
Exactly,
it's
exactly.
like you have I mean, some of it is, and I think the important thing to talk about too is like I can't testify to everyone that you're saying this about, right? But like my guess is, if it's anything based on my own experiences, these are people who aren't exactly like politically disengaged, so they're just like, oh, I just want to like ignore like the fascism. It's like these are people who are still, in fact, very much politically engaged
Right.
throughout that whole period, which just makes like their lack, and then having alarm, and then back, whatever direction it goes, like just all the more frustrating.
It does, it
um
does.
yeah, I mean it's just it's just weird where it's like, or even like, I mean, on like a political issue spectrum, you notice it too with I mean, like the kids in cages under Trump's
Yes,
administration
yes.
too. And then like concern for that just goes away under Biden. Not that like the issue really went away. In fact, many of these people sort of embrace, like the idea of, comprehensive immigration reform in as far as, it is a right-wing form of immigration reform rather than anything else.
And I think that's been the bizarre thing about this push towards tailism, right? In trying to imitate the right, it only just boosted the prospects for the nominal right winger in this case, right? And
Yeah.
it's disappointing, it's frustrating to watch all the same. And like you've said, this may, if they choose to remain conciliatory and go down the path of tailism, it's because I'm still seeing these debates about whether or not it's viable to carve out niches within the Democratic Party for the
Right.
nascent left, right? And to some extent, I'm not going to, say that everyone's corrupt, right? Like you have pockets of principled leadership, like you have the Rashida Tlaibs across America to some extent, right? But even then, like, we all lived through 2023. We know like the dirt they were putting on this woman's name. Like,
Yeah.
in what way, like, is that like a use? And I'm not saying that it was a waste of time, but it's just like, do you want to subject somebody to that all the time just because you think it's worth carving out a niche? I don't know. And
Well, and I
then,
mean, and that's kind of what I've been getting at too, is like the carving out the niches. I mean, that's still nominally like where I think the source of change, at least in as far as like electoral politics is concerned, right? Like,
yeah,
if you want to debate about what we can do outside of elections, more, I mean, that's a separate issue, right? You don't necessarily need a Democratic Party for that, and in fact, they're probably not the best organizers for that. But in terms of like people being in government, being able to influence our institutions in some way, I think the only viable path is, unless you want to wait generations or however long it takes to get some type of viable alternative party. Which, as I said, I mean, like I pointed to the Green Party's failures this year as like, even under these circumstances, as much as people claim there's like this appetite for something different in America, there really isn't. When you look at the way it pans out electorally. At least something different that's in a way that we would actually appreciate. And so like I think you have to carve out those niches, but like that's where like this really alarms me, is if like we just go full on conciliatory. I don't think there's any way we can carve out a niche. I think we're just blocked out of power perennially, and we have to go the alternate route.
agreed. And that's the other thing too, is like, people need to stop letting the Democrats set the tone. And I'm not saying go out full illegalism. That's stupid to say on air, right? But just thinking in terms of like how conciliatory people have been with the Democratic Party apparatus, it's made it harder to get wins in other avenues, like like nonprofits, like unions, like, and just all these like other tools that can still be used within the legal framework. If you let them set the tone and they continue to fail, it makes it harder for you to act outside of them. So I think like it's more
Sure.
useful, at least in my opinion, to put your chips on only carving out an electoral niche if you know it's yours to take, and just putting your chips in on anything else, whether it's protest, whether it's union efforts, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's community oriented organizing, that kind of stuff. I don't know what can be feasibly gained from letting the Democrats take the lead. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, to the extent that, you can carve out a path in the party, it involves sort of trying to set the narrative for the party, like you said. But I think, yeah, as I said, if it's clear that like the party is just going to, celebrate losing to Hitler, and I don't,
Frankly,
I
right?
mean,
Frankly.
what can you work with? Um, and that's just like kind of the tone that it comes across. Like, and the reason I'm concerned about this, it's like Joe Manchin said it, and yeah, like Joe Manchin's a fucking idiot. Like I'll just come out and say it, right? I think he's a fool. He will say, and I don't even, I mean, like, and I think it's demonstrated by the fact that there's no electoral future for Joe Manchin. He's just willing to say this stuff because he genuinely believes it.
Mhm.
But when James Clyburn said it, who, I mean, I have issues with James Clyburn too, but like that's someone who actually has Biden's ear. I don't think Biden's going to listen to Joe Manchin, but he might listen to, James Clyburn, the supposed kingmaker that got him into the White House in the first place. And I just think if you do it, it just sends like such a wrong message, and it's kind of that that bullshit like faux healing aspect too. Um, and like what's like the idea that like I mean I remember in the aftermath of the election in 16, I remember I don't think you were there. It was on campus. We had a with the Honor Society, we had hosted an inauguration watch party. And I remember, one of the college Republicans was interviewed about it, and she's like, "Oh, I truly just believe like time heals all wounds," which is again a very much just like a passive thing, right? And that's like kind of like thing. It's like this passive embrace, and like it's the continuous like one-sided like we still care about norms, we still care about stuff like this, right? I mean, it already looks bad enough with Joe Biden, hanging out with Trump, doing photo ops, helping, ensure this transition is smooth, right? That's already bad
Right.
enough and from an optics standpoint. But like, a big part of Trump's appeal too has been, that, it's not just like the faux populism, but that like sort of faux alpha status, right? Yeah, he's, kind of a giant baby, but he at least comes across to a segment of the population as this alpha male. And that's, the people around him have that same vibe. And like, to the extent the Democratic Party wants to be like, oh, we care about the rules so much that we're gonna, do everything in our power to make, these people feel good and welcome and at home. Like, it's just, and not even really rules, right? It's like norms, which I mean are sort of rules, but it's not like, it's not like they're required to do things the way they're doing. They're opting to, just because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel good to consider pardoning Trump, and all of that. And it's just like, how can how can they think that voters look at that and think like, this is good? The only people celebrating it are conservatives who are like, oh, hey, I hate Democrats, but I love how classy they are when we spank their ass. Um, and that's just like, my like that's just my long extended rant on this, that it's it's bad politics, it's bad electoralism, it's bad electioneering, it's just bad.
It's a special failure too, because like we're not going to be able to get into just what's happened in Syria, right? But like when the Democrats put all their chips on like blowing the election like this, they lose any authority to even pretend that like had you voted for us, we could have done something about Syria, Ukraine, Gaza, or any other like host of domestic issues, right?
Well, Syria, I mean, I get the outcome's ostensibly what they've wanted for years.
Yeah.
Like,
But it's
I
again, it's
mean,
like this is just a gift to give Trump on his wedding day type shit. Like
kind of, yeah.
it's not fun to watch this shit happen. It's really not fun.
No.
And it's also just again like another W for Netanyahu he doesn't deserve, and it's frustrating to watch. It's also frustrating to watch just I don't know. I don't know. We can probably do you want to get into the cabinet first, or do you want to get into what is at the time of this recording, a suspect has been apprehended in the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO.
Might as well knock him out of the way.
Let's knock that out. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. So what's Luigi Maginal or something? I don't know how.
Luigi Mangione. I mean,
Mangione. Okay, there we go.
I think like to me, the only two observations I have on this, because enough people have
this has dominated the online discourse.
This is And it's like this becoming a meme is like, okay, like I expected that to happen. The only two things is like, okay, it's very interesting to see like an act of stochastic violence where a single culprit was the victim instead of like innocent bystanders or kids. So
Sure.
that was, didn't expect that to happen. But then
Yeah.
also just like the, the way in which this guy got caught, I'm like, the, what is it about like American like assassinations that ends with the killer getting caught in like the stupidest ways possible? But also like it's just my only take on it is like this is the submarine implosion all over again. Like something bad happened to a rich person, and you
Well,
have
yeah,
the
I mean, the
people.
ongoing meme was I'm putting together a team, and it was like him before he was identified, the submarine that imploded, and then the orca that I think,
The orcas
yeah, the one that like had taken out like a one of
like a
like
yacht,
the
yeah.
yacht, yeah, like
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is just like it's disorganized violence happening to rich people for a change, and people are celebrating it to some extent. It's
yeah,
a kind of opposite Schadenfreude to like what the ones the liberals do. I have no comment on it. It happened. I'm not sure how else I should react to
yeah. I mean,
this.
I mean, yeah, there's not a whole lot. I mean, his politics are interesting.
That was another thing I recall seeing is just like he was like a like like a hustle grind influenced type guy. Politics all over the place, kind of
Yeah,
just.
which I guess, considering the act probably makes sense. The
I
fact that
mean,
he's like
most
refusing to do
Americans
it.
have incoherent politics. Let's really start there, right? So I'm
Right.
not I'm not shocked by that at all.
Maybe that's more representative than the fact that a healthcare CEO, or that the healthcare system adversely impacted his family's health.
Even then, it's like when people talk about like the left wing, like high profile criminals, like
Also, can I say like how stupid it is that like people like when they were like, "Oh, this is the issue," it must have been a left winger, like as if like only the left would care about healthcare.
and that's what I'm saying. It's like you think you
Like,
think you think only left wing people get fucked over by healthcare companies in America. Like a lot of people are convinced Trump will enact universal healthcare. Let's start there. But
right. Yeah, like I mean the fact that you have all these people who are like, "Oh, like what do you mean the ACA that he wants to repeal is
I, s-
Obamacare?" Or like
I still think the funniest thing was that his Goodreads quotes, like the last viewed one, was like the
the
Lorax. Until
Lorax.
somebody cares a lot, nothing's gonna happen.
I don't know if murder is exactly
I,
someone
I,
caring
I
a
don't
lot
know. That's not. I don't think that's what the Lorax was saying, man. I don't. I don't.
Well, it's not the Lorax, it's the guy at the end, right? The person
I,
who had destroyed the environment.
I can't remember. I can't remember. But just there's something so funny about
Yeah.
just like doing this like. And again, the thing that was like shocking, I guess, about this is like the precision with which this was done,
Oh,
only
yeah.
to then get caught. And again, the guy's a suspect.
Fucking
If
McDonald's.
you really want to go parabolic conspiracy theories, you could be like, oh, is he a patsy? I don't know, but I don't know. Like my whole guess was like, is this just corporate subterfuge where like the CEO might have been due to testify at some point, and this
There
was
was CNN had someone on that alleged that he called a hit on himself.
why would see this? Oh no! Oh no!
So I mean, these conspiracies are being repeated at the highest echelons of political power.
Fair enough. I don't know. I don't know. But it's just like again, like it played out exactly like the submarine implosion, where it's like
Oh yeah, the other comparison too was the Shinzo Abe killer, where just like instantly, like I mean, and I think there's even less in like onus to like care about Japanese politics, let alone Shinzo Abe, but like everyone just immediately heralded that guy as like a hero, um, and like the internet just objectively agreed, like, no, this is hilarious, like we don't care that someone's dead. They
Oh
probably
my
deserved it.
gosh. So, Luigi, if it was you, sorry, man. I might put some money on your books, but that's about it. Oh my gosh. So, let's
If
get
it
to
wasn't him, he definitely like wants to have been the person. Based
that's
on
the
like the
other.
reaction, like that's like it's like there's a possibility that it's not him, but he's just gonna like take ownership of it just as like a publicity thing. I think that's the only alternative at this point
I
because
mean,
like he was like yelling like basically like what you would expect the person who did that to yell like when the police were taking him into the station and whatnot.
oh my gosh, I haven't seen all of that, but just like seeing the name Luigi Mangione was the suspect. I'm just in my head. I'm just like, this is anti-Italian discrimination. Frankly, that's that.
Right. I mean, the joke has been we'll find out if Italians are white or not.
Oh
In America,
no! Oh
but
no! I remember seeing that tweet. Oh my god! I didn't. It was sent to me. I didn't seek it out. But oh
well,
my
I mean, how do you
gosh.
seek it out? Like, just like I gotta like.
Well, actually, here's the funny thing too.
Well,
Because if you
that's been
don't,
entirely my feed. Has been like jokes about this. I don't. It's just like
it
that's
just
all that shows up.
no.
Elon had made some like bitchy tweet about how CEOs make the world go around, and he apparently liked Elon too, which was yeah, again the politics of the average American not necessarily coherent.
Not coherent at all. Not coherent at all. Oh my gosh. All right. So, our marquee entry for today's episode, the ever evolving at the time of recording, um, list of Trump cabinet appointees. You picked out the highlights, and
Or the
this
low
is
lights.
or highlight low lives. We can call it that, right? Where it's
There we
just
go.
this has been a real rogues gallery, and I think the highest profile of these, right? Now, before we get into that, the fact that you called Elon and Vivek the kitchen cabinet for the 21st century, that's some deep that's a deep Andrew Jackson cut right there. I'm wondering
It's
who's
what
gonna get
they
that.
are.
I
It's
mean,
what they are.
it, we'll get to these freaks in a second. I think the highest profile of this, right, was Matt Gaetz initially being his pick for attorney general nominee, um and then a very high profile series of well let me rephrase that. So Matt Gaetz, whose own history of sexual misconduct, I think immediately chased him out of the running and kind of pushed his hand into declining the offer. But also, I wonder to what extent that's been informed by the amount of enemies he's made within the Republican caucus.
I think it's almost exclusively that. I think that he could have we could have like it on tape. The act. Well, I actually suppose that we might have that on tape. And I think a lot of them wouldn't care. But I think it's just that he's made enemies. Fun story of Matt Gaetz. You might be wondering where I was when I found out that Matt Gaetz was Attorney General or was going to be the Attorney General pick.
Where were you?
So I was teaching my Congress class, and one of my students just blurts out in the middle of the session, like, "Sorry to interrupt, but Matt Gaetz was just announced as the Attorney General pick." And I just like burst out laughing. For my students have claimed, because there was someone that wasn't there that day and had always would ask me about what I thought about something afterwards, and she had said something. He's like, "Oh, he laughed for 5 minutes, just maniacally," and it's like I just was laughing. I'm like, you're fucking lying to me. Like, there's no way. And I just looked it up in the middle of my lecture, right on the big screen. And I'm like, yeah, there it is. So I just kept laughing. I don't know if I actually laughed as long as he said he did. But I said it was half maniacal, half just serious. And I was part of me really wanted Matt Gaetz to be confirmed, just because I'm just completely scrub any
Have to
notion that these
recuse
are
himself from every case like that.
right, yeah, and to be, I mean, I on one hand I actually think his God, I don't want to admit that, but like his politics in that position wouldn't have been as abhorrent as some alternatives. But as a person, obviously a loathsome piece of garbage. And it was just like, let him be confirmed. Let them like hang themselves off of the noose of Matt Gaetz. That like, this is how morally bankrupt we are. This is how little. And it turns out they might still, go that route.
Yeah,
We
and
shall
it's
see.
we will, because I think there is this like weird like right wing praise for Matt Gaetz as being this. No, you don't understand. He's big on antitrust, and I'm like, I'll believe it when I see it.
One of my
Um,
students said that they were really bothered that the right wing opposition to him seemed to be entirely rooted in the fact that he was like lenient on lenient on marijuana. And I'm like, well, think about what that says about the conservatives who have an objection to him.
right.
That's what they're concerned about.
Like that's what you're that's the line you draw, and especially like in Florida, like being pro medical marijuana is probably not that offensive a position. I would think. I don't know though.
Yeah.
But then
It's
so the replacement pick for Matt Gaetz, Pam
Mhm.
Bondi, I think like that has been another worrisome pick, right? Because in the same way that like in the first Trump turn, Jeff Sessions as the pick for AG was a very worrisome one,
right.
being like just a virulent like Klan adjacent type. Pam Bondi is like the epitome of like corrupt Republican like state. I would say like state AG, where she would always take the side of like unscrupulous industry or unscrupulous businesses. Um, and that sets a very dangerous precedent, I think, in the coming Trump term. And
Yeah, and
yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, like text or ties to like the tech companies, particularly Elon. I think her sister or sister-in-law is like Elon's attorney.
Oh boy.
For one of the cases before it. So like, I mean, there's like going to be like all kinds of issues that are going to emerge from this. But like, this is kind of, I mean, she's more so like the brand of like the type of nominee that is almost certainly going to be confirmed. And this is probably going to be like sort of the modal like Trump nominee in terms of like what you would expect, right? A lot of the ones we're going to be talking about have like issues that are probably worse in some cases, but like that doesn't like excuse like the problematic nature of her nomination and her role in that position.
It does not at all. And I think it's like either Trump is picking like the most like just bizarrely morally corrupt with like the Matt Gaetz, Pete Hegseth, and to some extent Linda McMahon. I do have just one thing to say there, right? But Pam Bondi and Marco Rubio, for example, right? As just
I
like,
forgot to even list her on this.
oh
Whoops.
my god, like, but that's what I'm saying. Like Pam Bondi, Marco Rubio, just like the bog standard Florida Republican who's like in appealing to this moderate face. There's actually a Janice face where the other one is like brazen corporatism. Like the Rick Scott Republicans
Right.
have been folded in nicely to the Trump cohort at this point. But yeah, Matt Gaetz,
Just like they were during the first term.
exactly. So I mean, Pete Hegseth and Linda McMahon. I mean, Linda McMahon specifically as like the charter school advocate. I kind of see her as like, who was the last Secretary of Education? Why can I not remember her name?
Betsy DeVos.
Yes, Betsy DeVos. Like this is Betsy DeVos on steroids. Except with Linda McMahon, it's not only like the charter school fetish with their approach to education. It's also her role in like Vince McMahon's like monstrous like
Yep.
sexual misconduct allegations. My God, like
I think she has some of her own too, or at least ones that she's like covered up that weren't related
Oh
to him.
no! Oh my gosh!
So
Yeah.
she was, to be fair, she was in the first Trump cabinet. She was the Secretary of Small
Oh yeah,
Business,
yeah,
which,
yeah.
yeah, like the WWE, which is literally, killed, like, you know, literally its entire success is predicated on the eradication of multiple small businesses. Um, Perfect person for that role. Um, it's another one of those cases too, where it's like, um, when I got my job, my advisor joked that it was sort of like this like Slumdog Millionaire thing where, like, if you've seen that movie, where it's like his specific life experiences made him like absolutely perfectly suited to, like, that role,
Yeah.
to like win that contest. And it was like that was pretty much where it is here. And it's like this is like another example of that, like, of all of the, here's, the political science professor who's done a wrestling podcast too, and here's the wrestling coming back into the Trump administration, and so, like, uniquely qualified to speak on, the wickedness of the McMahons, and it's just amusing. It was funny. I was talking with one of my colleagues about it, and I was like, well, I mean, I guess I'll take her over, like, the Moms for Liberty person that I thought for sure was going to be the Secretary of Education nominee. But that doesn't mean that she's going to be a good fit for that department. I know they had talked about um, terminating the Department of Education. I don't know where that is at this point. Like, I don't know if that's actually going to happen or not. I would think that, like, because Trump is actually close with the McMahons, that he's not just like, hey, here's a job that I'm going to fire you from because we're going to end its position. Like, I don't think he'll do that. But I mean, I mean, some of the even some, like, the weird things that happened when DeVos was in charge. Like,
Right.
do you remember how many texts you would get about, like, your student loan or things related to that?
Yeah.
That's like that stuff's gonna happen again. They're going to sell out your data, and all of that. If you are a student, if you have any type of student loans that are still lingering, anything that you've interacted with, like a FAFSA or anything like that, they will probably, sell out your data again. There's, and that's like, maybe like a more annoying consequence than anything. But, like, there's, I don't know what that, does to education standards in this country. I think basically it's going to give a green light to a lot of what we're already seeing in a lot of red states. They're ending DEI programs at different schools. They're doing a lot to sort of kind of bastardize education in the same way that they, did the first time, that they've always, talked about doing and have always aspired to do.
And it's very worrisome to notice that trend as, like, we see reports of, like, benchmarks for student performance drop in some categories.
Yeah.
We're seeing just, like, the hollowing out and carving out of resources for public schools, as well as just again, like, the push towards charter schools and
Sure.
just the whole anti-woke bullshit that we're foisting
Yeah.
on educators, right? Like, it's a very worrisome trend, one, to push this, like, corporatist right-wing ideology of education onto a system that needs tremendous reform. But it also just, like, in a moral sense, right? Like, what does this say about this country in terms of, like, its future? If it can't, and I mean, it sounds so hokey to say this, but for real, like, if it cannot even conceive of what skills or knowledge it wants to impart on the next generation, like, what are we doing?
Right. I mean, we've kind of embraced this, like, for-profit model of education as a whole. Like, the idea that, we've turned education into, like, a true commodity, but, like, it's not even, like, clear what the discernible goals is from the people who've done so. Right? Like,
Exactly.
other than just, like, we think that this has been used as a tool by the left to indoctrinate folks, and we want that for ourselves. That seems to be just sort of the objective here, but it's not like, I'm not saying like indoctrination's good as long as you give them some life skills, but like, like can't you like figure some type of project into that, right? Like other than just like we want, and I was gonna say create a debtor class, but they don't even really want that. They want, they don't like people going to college. So I don't even know what they're trying to do. Just a obedient worker bees, I guess, who are unqualified for like anything. Um, yeah, I mean, it's maybe a traditional capitalistic lack of foresight into what they're reaping.
It's very that opens up a portal into just this thing that has. I was talking to you about existential dread when we started, and I guess I can open up on it now, right? Which is,
Yeah,
this society cannot articulate any meaningful future, and it's crazy that Linda McMahon opened this door, but I feel like I have to step in it where it's like we
well,
have
as the relic of the past, not much of a future herself. Makes sense.
but that's what I'm saying, right? So it's like this idea of like we have to prevent any critical examination of the nation's founding history, even when, let's say, there's like problems or reductive aspects to things like the 1619 project, or there's issues with um, liberal presentations of those histories, right?
Sure.
The idea then that we should pretend everything was good with like those counter 1776 Project U, or like PragerU, or all of that like right wing hagiographic media, right? It's like closing the door on the past to me, right? But then at the same time, like they cannot articulate a future. Like they beckon to this past, they invoke the past, whether it's like the crypto Nazis with like their Roman busts, or it's these kind of like red, white, and blue stars and stripes invocation with the founding fathers that means nothing. But then they have no vision for a future. The future is just Cybertrucks and like underground tunnels and the dome in Las Vegas. That's the future to these people.
Yeah,
And then
like I mean, it's like I guess the future is like sort of a re-litigation of the past, right? Make America great again, right? It's sort of like what would at what stage it was prior, previously great. We want that again, but like there's not like like I just don't think like the average person is like that like adverse to progress that they're like, yeah, like, I think things should be exactly like they were in 1929 or whatever year we're talking about, right? Like no one's like, yeah, let's take the technology back too, right? Let's just take everything back. Let's put society back exactly into that time space.
yeah, and it almost like makes me wonder like this obsession, especially with nostalgia on the right. So like you see this in like right wing gaming subcultures with like not just like, because again like vintage and retro like aesthetics have always had their place. It's not inherently
Sure.
reactionary. But have you seen like the subset of that where it's like this is what they took from you, or like video games are too woke, and it's like this
Yeah.
feigned nostalgia, like that is the only present the right can seem to articulate, is this cosplay of a past in the present, but
Well,
no
and
future and no real past to open the door to.
and it's kind of it's the gamer aspect is like this interesting microcosm of kind of like the broader cultural sphere in a lot of ways, I think. And that's not just like me being like a self-important gamer or whatever. It's because I mean Elon was talking about this where he wants to turn X into a video game development company, because why the fuck not, using AI. But he was talking about how like AAA games like suck, and it's like it's to me, it's like it's like a perfect microcosm of everything that the right has issues with, like corporate culture today, where it's like
Yeah.
it's all DEI. It's all DEI, it's all woke. That's the issue. It's nothing to do with profit incentives, it's nothing to do with greed, it's nothing to do with any of that. He wants to buy Hasbro because um I don't even, it's not even a book they made, I'm pretty sure. I think it's a licensed book for D&D where it has a prelude that dares to mention that, like, hey, there's some seriously racist and sexist stuff that was informing a lot of the initial design of this game.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, we're leaving it unaltered, but we want to, clarify that yes, we know that this is problematic. And it's like a paragraph, and he's like, I gotta buy like the whole company and like kill them all, like do whatever I can to like restore the integrity of women having a strength cap in D&D or whatever. Um,
God.
and like that's like it's all, as I said, it's like a reflection of just a broader thing where it's like it's not a meaningful consideration of power. It's just we don't like it's this is inherently the thing that's different, is there was not diversity before and now there is, and that's the real problem. Not that nothing else that would actually be a meaningful source of blame. We're not going to consider any of that. We're just going to consider woke DEI stuff.
Absolutely, and you see this in a variety of subcultures too. Like I just said games because that's what came to mind, and like that's
Yeah.
its own microcosm that exposits all this. The other one that's another low hanging fruit is like trad wives, and trad wife influence,
Yeah.
where it's like this feigned replay.
Well, at least that is like pretty blatantly, explicitly a right-wing project.
It is, but even then, it's like, so you're basically like, because it's using all the trappings of the present, so like social media, technology, like phones and video production, and stand mixers, kitchen equipment, consumer goods, to replay the actions of like a 1950s housewife on a magazine cover. It's like nostalgia is the only thing these people can imagine. I mean, even like down to the slogan "Make America Great Again." We'll get into the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, because that's just like one of those timeless works that captures the present moment a little too clearly for me. But there is, I mean, just something to be said about how like this is a moment in which the examination of the past has been closed. Any vision of a hopeful future has also been closed. So what's left in the present? If not, obviously, cruelty and wanton destruction, it is also reenacting like a very specific and false vision of the past using all the tools of the present. Hell, I mean, you even look at like something like, I mean, just you look at Musk's like whole like returned shit, or even like something as stupid as the Cybertruck, right? It's the aesthetics of like the 80s. It's the aesthetics of like low poly.
Yeah, it's that retrofuturism.
Yeah, retrofuturism, but not even for like anything that pushes technical limits, or like has like a net impact, or like does something like pushes the needle forward in any way. It's just to do it for the sake of doing it. And that's like in the same way that like losing is a virtue to the Democrats, just replaying nostalgia is its own virtue for the right. And at least like you could argue for past right wingers, it may have been like reverence for the past. They could at least pretend it was that.
Right.
Now this is just full on like masturbatory at worst and like pretentious at best.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I mean, like anytime like we sort of get into like a blaming of, because I mean I think you're correctly assessing like sort of like the role that nostalgia plays for them, in a really unfortunate way.
Mm-hmm.
But like, because I mean I think some people in the space also get a little too pedantic with it. Like there was a little bit of discourse about like the angry video game nerd of all people, and how he's
my god,
he's radicalized fascist in this country because he wants to take you back to the past. It's like,
isn't he like a lib? I don't know.
I think
am I
he
making
is.
that up? Like,
I think he is, but it's also just like, man, like this is like the opposite. Like this, I mean, I get that maybe some of the language is borrowed in chud culture now that he
right.
said, but like I'm like, this isn't it. Like, if we're gonna get like pedantic about this, then we're never gonna like get to the root source of any of these problems. But I was like thinking like, because even with like his content more broadly, it's like, the way that like I experience nostalgic things is like, yeah, I feel nostalgia for stuff that like, okay, I grew up with this, I'm entertained and whatnot, but like it's for me, what's gratifying is seeing it with like the new lens of the fact that I'm 20 years older or whatever. You know
Mhm,
what I mean? Like it's
mhm.
not with like this like, oh hey, yeah, like man, like I wish I could just, be a 5-year-old again or something. You know what I mean? Like that, which is like it seems to be kind of where they're at, or like, oh, nothing good has ever come since then. And that's kind of what like where like it's a fundamental difference. I think just kind of with myself and a lot of other people and how like a lot of people on the right experience that type of nostalgia.
This is probably the last diatribe I'll do into like phenomenology, and then we can probably get back into our cabinet discussion. But on that note, right? Because when we're talking about nostalgia, we're talking about re-examining the past, and I'm just also tying this because I've also just been thinking about like trauma informed care. I've been reading stuff about that. I've been reading stuff about like how people's past like can you shape their attitudes in the present and stuff like that.
Sure.
And in the same vein, I've also just again like this is a word that comes up in online discourse. I haven't seen a lot of academic stuff about this, but I'm curious about it to some extent, which is like the idea of self-infantilization. I've really only seen it in like
Yeah.
feminist think pieces more so, but this idea of like, like referring to oneself or treating oneself with kid gloves, right? And
Hmm.
to some extent you could kind of see like there's this take that like neoliberalism encourages people to self-infantilize in the sense that like your immediate gratification is all you think about and it makes you selfish. But then if you
Sure.
think about that writ large, right? Like if you have two competing political forces that are in this self-infantilizing mode, or at least if you take their Gen Z supporters who do that, you have like the liberal lens of that views itself as fundamentally powerless and waiting for an adult to act on their behalf. And then you have the right wing version of that, which is full on tantrum at all moments, and it needs people to be subservient to its every whim.
Yeah. Hmm.
I don't know what that yields, but that's just like that just been like floating in my head as we talk about this. So speaking of infantilization in little people, Marco Rubio.
Yeah. So Rubio is probably, I guess, nominally the least controversial Trump cabinet pick so far. Um, being put in as Secretary of State, is he tremendously qualified for this? Probably not. I think this is kind of in the like the more norm sense. Like, yeah, this is kind of the more traditional type of pick you would get for there. Big controversy with him, obviously, is kind of his foreign policy view, which,
Right.
as it turns out, the Department of State is directly responsible for. And he's very much like, I mean, this has been kind of buried in the news almost completely, but is deeply pro-Israel, more so than like the average politician, like by far. Right, very much of the mind, like, they need to finish the job.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's going to inform a lot of the foreign policy. This should dispel any notion that Trump is a anti-war individual.
Exactly. It should.
Will
It
it?
absolutely should.
I don't know, but it should absolutely, clarify to people that like, yeah, he's not exactly anti-war, to say the least.
That's also been worrisome to me, right? Because not only it's his view on Israel, but it's his very it's like he took Bush era Middle East policy and let it like age in the Trump casket. So him,
Yeah.
Tom Cotton, Lindsey Graham have all kind of at least in my head, like they're beating the war drum with Iran, and that's like an old project of the Cheneys that may come back into fruition, and
Well,
just
and
with
it's something that like people seem to keep forgetting about from the first Trump administration.
right,
Like
right,
that he, very like I mean like to the extent that like I ever said, and others have as well, that his foreign policy wasn't like totally disastrous. It was almost purely from the perspective of he continuously walked us up to the cliff, took one step over, and then you know, decided to walk back at the last second.
exactly, exactly.
Like, and because I mean, Iran, I mean, assassinating Soleimani, a lot of provocations there, and like this isn't the Bush era. I'm not saying that like, oh, had we gone to war with Iran during the Bush era, it would have been a truly good thing. I don't think it would have. Um, but Iran, thanks to their foreign policy towards Iran, has developed nuclear weapons. Um, we've enabled this and I don't, is this just like some apocalyptic fantasy they want to live out? I don't know. But like they've made it all the more difficult to like actually, face this enemy without consequences if they really want to relitigate this as a major conflict.
Yeah, it's like I don't really feel like it's our business to cast aspersions on whether a particular state is a good or a bad actor, but I do criticize a foreign policy that is basically how many times can we poke the bear?
Yeah.
That's really it, and that to me I think is the most worrisome aspect of Marco Rubio, if not for those bizarre boots he keeps wearing.
Well, and also on foreign policy, we kind of alluded to him, but Pete Hegseth we didn't
Yes,
really talk
yes.
about as much. So is he on Fox and Friends? He's one of the Fox hosts, I
He's
think.
one of the Fox and Friends hosts, and I think
Yeah, I couldn't remember
that
which show.
that was a big like Trump old man moment of like you're picking the guy you saw on TV. Real
One
weird. But I
100%. I mean, we didn't really talk about this with these picks in general, but like, congressional leaders sat down with Trump to tell him that he had to stop like appointing members of Congress because like they have such a narrow majority, and he was like basically gonna strip it away because I'm like, yeah, because these are the only people he knows.
that's
Dudes
interesting.
on TV, people in Congress. Yeah, because it was like Matt Gaetz. I mean, Matt Gaetz resigned anyways. So he's gone, period. They'll have to do a special election there. But Marco Rubio's in Congress. There was a couple others. Elise Stefanik. I can't remember. Is she an ambassador? Oh, UN. UN's ambassador or negotiator, whatever it is. So there's, like it was an issue that they had to, like, sit down with him, like, hey, you have to stop appointing people from Congress. So like it's as I said, it's people he knows. So dude he saw on TV. Here's Pete Hegseth. Um, Obviously, since he's been nominated, a ton of allegations have come out about him. His own mother, though she did, do an interview where she tried to prop her son back up. But she said enough horrible things about him in like some letter that I was like, if my mom said those things about me, I would have killed myself. Because
I mean, it
frankly,
was
it was
very frank. It was like not
yeah,
only does this guy have a record of misconduct, his own mother like to his face like you are an abuser of women. Like that was the line and that stuck out the most
yeah.
in that email or letter. And of course it is like come on. Why like you were right. Why did you have to walk that back? But in addition to that too is like um he's a violent drunk from what from what people are saying. Like he would show up to
Right.
veterans events sloshed and uncontrollable and had to be like escorted away from these events.
When it's funny too, because like it reminds me of another, formerly drunk and sloshed,
Brett
Trump
Kavanaugh.
appointee. Yeah, in that too, like the structure. I remember reading this. God, I can't remember the book. But there's a good book on the Kavanaugh confirmations where there was one point where Trump was considering pulling his nomination, and it had nothing to do with the allegations. It was that he felt like he was being a pussy. about them, that he was like, you know, he wasn't defending himself appropriately. So he was like thinking like, oh, I don't want this guy, basically. And I think Hegseth, from what I've heard, has kind of gone through a similar thing where like Trump was like briefly considering backing off on nominating him, but then like as he's like kind of like continued to fight against, you know, like Congress and whatnot, he's like, oh yeah, I'm backing him all the way. Like he wants a fighter. Even for like if you're fighting for the worst causes known to man, he wants you on his team. That's just how Trump is.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's whole, you know, I don't want to get into the whole like is Trump a narcissist thing because that's just played out. But if you buy that theory, of course he's drawn to like these domineering figures who like
Sure.
control the room. That tracks. With Hegseth, what's also just weird to me, in addition to all that, where I mean, with Kavanaugh and then like a lot of these cabinet picks, there was some discourse about like, is Trump trying to signal a return to a misogynistic culture, which, you know, we can.
I mean,
I don't know how you talk about that in the context of Joe Biden technically shutting down Me Too, but that's a dispute we don't even need to begin to get into. However, it's like, you know, it's not good stuff. I also think Hegseth just being a Deus Vult type of guy, who's like, we need to do the
Yeah.
Crusades in the Middle East, it's
Right.
it's as horrible as it is just juvenile.
Yeah, and I mean like the whole like Crusades in the Middle East thing is something that like they really tried to avoid under like the Bush administration. So
Yeah.
like I mean
Oh,
not
George Bush
exactly
lost because he was woke. Is that the new
right.
fucking take? Oh god.
Right, you know, I mean I'm just like saying like that's how like further we're going now. In terms of like just embracing like insanity.
Well, speaking of embracing insanity, Health and Human Services and Medicare Medicaid, two more people, well, one from TV and one from God knows where. So Dr. Oz for Medicare and Medicaid, that I don't even know where to begin hooting and hollering other than like, he's been exposed as a quack several times. What are you doing? And he was a loser. Like, he lost to Fetterman.
Yeah.
How'd you do that? How did you do that? But then
Especially in
RFK
hindsight,
Jr.
right?
And then RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services. What are you gaining from that? I don't know if he's gonna make it past confirmation, but like, that was just a complete. I get that Trump enjoys doing the everyone who isn't friends with the Democrats come take a picture with me. I didn't know he was just handing out jobs like that too.
Yeah, and some of it is like I mean I know some people think that like the Matt Gaetz and like the Pete Hegseths are like there to like sort of like run cover for like RFK Jr., the Kash Patels, the Tulsi Gabbards, who we'll talk about as well. Like, and I mean I don't know if that's necessarily. I mean I don't like. I think Trump is like semi-strategic. I don't think he's a strategic genius. I don't think that he's necessarily thinking those picks through in terms of like I think he very much would love to have all of them. I don't think he's like, oh well, I can only get some of these, so I'm gonna like nominate some more absurd picks to like, you know, sort of, you know, pan out as much options as I want. That's at least my take. But like I mean part of me, I mean like maybe this is like just absurd. Like I mean is like, you know, I mean RFK Jr. probably, you know, had some deal with him, right? That was why he dropped out of the race, was to, you know, like I'll get a cabinet post. And obviously, I mean, I've mentioned before, this is probably maybe one of the more consequential ones in terms of like domestic issues, because everything RFK Jr. wants is like a net negative towards public health. Everything he plans on doing is not good. And I'm like, is part of why he was like, does Trump not realize that he's like junior and he's like, oh hey, like this is a guy who was, you know, it's RFK. He was, you know, assassinated and yet here he is still alive. Like he must know a thing or two about health and human
Oh my
services.
gosh.
Like, you know, I mean, it's just like, oh, he's immortal. I gotta, you know.
I mean,
I gotta have this guy.
it's a very obvious bone to throw to the anti-vax crowd, but like it
Yeah,
does speak something to like how, especially as healthcare is this thing that's like tenuously precarious for people or it's out of people's grasp,
right.
and people feel, at least anecdotally, they feel more like their health is something less out of their control. And also, this is just a cultural thing I've noticed is that people in the West tend to be more fixated on their mortality for whatever reason. And I think it has to do
Hmm.
with economic precarity to some extent, right? Like, we don't have. Well, and I mean, you tie that with just how, because we've talked about like criticism of healthcare in America that's rooted in evidence versus criticism that's more hysterical, right? And I
Yeah.
think like all people have, as things get more precarious and as there's this anti-intellectual malaise that plagues the culture, right? Like it will be hysterical criticism of healthcare that wins the day, and you see that with like,
Yeah.
I mean, everything down to like fitness influencers, diet influencers. The influencer really at the end of the day is your new doctor, to sell you a product. Like somehow we're back to selling snake oil.
Yeah, and again, it's like his views on health are so like paradoxical because it is like on one hand he's like almost a literal snake oil salesman, but on the other hand he's also like like kind of on that like entirely like you just have to be self-sufficient in addressing your own health concerns and like not like taking medicine at all, not doing anything, which isn't exactly medically sound in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah.
And also just deeply like horrendous views on like people with autism and stuff like that. I mean, he literally
Right.
said shortly after this nomination was like, and he has no power to enact this, to be clear. I mean, could Trump pursue something like this? Maybe, but like RFK can't. Which was that like people who are on Adderall should be sent to work camps. Like I don't
That's
think like
especially
no public
insensitive when there's a
official,
short.
right? And no public official should probably be saying anything about like sending anyone to a work camp. Anyways, but like as I said, it's just deeply like like it couldn't. And again, like the idea that like it's like I always kind of joke that his views are like you're better off dead than autistic. But I mean, clearly, I think that that has panned out that is in fact his worldview. Um, you know, the vaccines make you autistic. You'd rather die from like whatever disease it is than have some form of autism on the spectrum. Um, and it's just like it's just abhorrent views. Um, and a complete like just like it's just like anti-intellectualism to like the nth degree. It's like his understanding. I mean, I literally taught a statistics class this semester, and we didn't
Right.
go through as much of like how it's composed, but like the big stuff we went through is like kind of like these types of errors you can make, right? And it's like his like, okay, look at the rates of autism have gone up, the rates of vaccinations have gone up, therefore these must be connected. That is the
Yeah.
extent to which he has analyzed this issue. It's the extent to which he has analyzed anything. It's like, oh, chronic pain is increased, and so has vaccines or whatever. It must be because of this. It's not because we've improved medical diagnoses. It's not because of anything else. It is entirely because of whatever I choose to blame for this. You can present any number of facts on how vaccine efficacy has improved certain things. You can present any of that, and he fundamentally does not care.
And the worst part about that type of bias, because it's not to harp on RFK specifically, but like this is to really address like the problems with this anti-intellectual worldview, right? Is
Yeah.
it blinds you then to the ability to actually draw connections that need to be made. So like this is something that I think about a lot because I'm personally affected, right? But it's like, you know, people talk a lot about obesity or like weight issues like it's a personal failure.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, how do you talk about it without like a public health aspect? How do you talk about it without talking about changes in diet patterns? How do you talk about it without access to
Yeah.
recreation and time to exercise? How do you talk about it without
Access to good
education?
food.
Exactly, education and nutrition,
Yep.
all that stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you can't draw those, if you're drawing stupid ass connections, how do you draw connections that need to be made? It's worrisome at every level.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we got four more picks to discuss. I think that we'll group these two and then we'll do the other two as a group. So FBI and national intelligence, we have two spooks walking in. And knock knock, is that the Indian intelligence service waiting behind? Is
Right.
that wall getting collecting data? Who knows?
Maybe this is why he wants to put tariffs on Canada. They've been they've had those they've been angry about the different it's not the Hindu nationalists that have been killed there, right?
Okay, so I mean, the thing with Canada that always gets me, right, is for whatever reason Trudeau made several unforced errors in picking cabinet or picking like people to come in. So the Ukrainian Nazi that was about to give the salute in Parliament, that was like an
Yeah.
unforced error because he was invited by like ex-Ukrainian right wingers or something like that. And then like in Canada, because there's a large like Punjabi and Sikh population, elements of like the Khalistani movement, which is its own like right-wing separatist movement in India that was born out of political strife. Like there were pogroms and
Right.
tensions from the liberal INC that kind of like let a lot of this pop off. Um, you had this separatist movement, and I wouldn't call like that's what I'm saying is like you can't view every separatist or independence movement as inherently progressive because some of them are
Right.
explicitly right wing, and this is one of them. So
Really, it's like Scotland is like the only one that's like left wing.
yeah, Ireland, yeah, it's like I'm a Republican, the IRA, but anyway, but
Yeah, it's like most for the most part, it's not exactly separatism. Usually is not tied to left wing movements.
yeah. So like there's like a Khalistani element within Canada. I didn't know, I didn't realize it was that heated until like leaders there were getting murked by Indian intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we talked about it on the show when it was happening, and I was
And
just
it
like,
it,
it just
it
occurred to
was
me, like,
nebulous then. It's still kind of nebulous now. But we've talked about the resurgent, or I guess insurgent, influence of Hindutva and right wing Hindu nationalist elements from India on the global stage, and how they're trying to make inroads with the global right, so to speak, right? And I think Tulsi Gabbard has always had weird connections to them through her career.
yeah,
Her case is weird because she's a Hindu convert and not like born into it. So that was always like kind of odd to me, where it's like, okay, I can understand being a
yeah,
convert, but then why are you consorting with the political elements? That's interesting. And then Kash Patel, I think uniquely sent me into like a malaise and angry depression, because him and Vivek Ramaswamy, I've talked about this before, I'm going to talk about it again, how like model minority status can set you up for this fetishization of the wages of whiteness, as W.B. Du Bois described them, where it's like you
sure,
want to be seen as an equal by your white counterparts. And if you're within like if you've ever seen college Republicans interact, or if you've seen like these more like,
unfortunately,
or like you see like ethnic Republican Party activists these days, and you're like, how did that happen? That's who these guys are. And it kind of was just frustrating to me, where it's like these guys will be held up by elders in my community as like examples of success, and not for the
yeah,
freaks that they are. But Kash Patel, what's to be said about this guy other than like typical Florida spook. The only thing that really bothered me offhand about his immediate comments were like, first day we're turning the Hoover Building into the Museum of the Deep State. And whenever like right wingers talk about the deep state, I'm like,
Right.
so you're not going to talk about your role in it, are you? You're not going to talk because it's like, okay, so
Right.
you're going to talk about the persecution of Trump. Are you going to talk about restitution for MLK's family, for Malcolm X's family?
Right. Well,
Um,
and that's like exactly like that. And I wasn't thinking about that earlier with like the issues when I was like talking about like the number, like those issues when like someone brings it up, particularly on the right, you're like you're in for like a
exactly,
serious
exactly, yeah, yeah,
conversation.
exactly.
And almost certainly he was appointed, or he's nominated for director of the FBI entirely because he like defended Trump, so that the FBI like unfairly surveilled him. All that he's a conspiracy nut. Obviously a museum of the deep state, right? I mean, I don't even think as a director of the FBI you can do that. Like, I don't think it gives you unilateral like authority to just like, okay, can we like change our office building? Let's move elsewhere. I don't know. It's silly. Tulsi Gabbard, I'm sure she's probably pouring one out for Assad. Um, you know, he only had to make it a few more, weeks,
I
and
kind of feel like Tulsi Gabbard will just pretend nothing happened. Like she will be asked point blank questions about Syria and have nothing to say.
so
That's
she's been
usually how I see
getting.
these things going.
I've heard so like obviously a lot of these nominees have been doing like in-person interviews with like senators on like the oversight committees for their like things. I have heard that hers are apparently going exceptionally poorly,
Mm,
which doesn't. I mean, somewhat surprises me. I guess like it does and it doesn't, right? I mean, her views are definitely kind of like out of step with a lot of people like in the Senate, and probably just in the American public and in the American political sphere more broadly. But I just kind of figured that normally she just kind of gets by on like that like deeply inauthentic charm that she gives off.
yeah,
Like I mean she's a weird figure where like I guess like her political like charisma to the extent that it exists just gets off the fact that she's attractive. I guess like that seems to be the only thing because I mean the way anytime she opens her mouth like I'm hard pressed to think of a politician that is like more inauthentic, which is saying a lot about America considering American politicians.
right. I mean, there is something funny about like if someone is conventionally attractive and then they have no charisma. There's something very unnerving about that. But I mean, to that end too, like her career is entirely bizarre. Like
Yeah.
she's a Democrat from Hawaii, but of a Samoan background. Um,
Well, and she's got that weird like religious background that like she was part of what was ostensibly a cult.
Well,
Um
there's the Hindu connection. There that comes.
yeah.
There that comes.
Um
And then again, like her dad being a Republican state representative,
yeah.
like that's interesting to note. Then like being somewhat bizarre in her voting record in Congress. I can't put my
Yeah.
finger on like all the suspicious votes, but just having a bizarre record as a member of the House. And then from there, Bernie surrogate in 2016,
Yeah.
then presidential run 2020, only to then drop out
And
from
endorse Biden.
and endorse Biden. So that's again, how do you make the jump from all these jumps are inherently bizarre. And we've
Right.
talked about how like, you know, Americans are politically incoherent to begin with, but especially within party politics, you're more of a free agent, so you don't have to always toe the line if you choose not to. But it just begs the question, like, is Tulsi Gabbard just weird like that? Or is she spooked up? Like what's the deal with her? And I don't think anyone can put their finger on like what is Tulsi's deal.
And like I mean obviously like I mean it kind of depends on how this nomination goes, but like it's bizarre how like unpunished she's been for any of it. Like any other political figure like does half of what she's done in terms of the jumps. Like they're done. Right? Like that's like you will be punished. No one will want anything to do with you because you inherently cannot be trusted.
There is
yet
some.
she's gotten through it somehow.
I think it's because when you're a grifter like that, you only really make money or you make moves when you shift to the right. Like
That's
we talked
fair.
about how like RFK started in like the left-ish, liberal-ish online radio scene to then like where he is now. We've talked about, I mean, who's another example? Jimmy Dore, at least, like, will never get further than where he got, but he could have had the same career path if he worked harder, so to speak.
You know
Tulsi
how hard
Gabbard.
it is to cut, daily podcast shows.
Well, I mean, who's that one like Young Turks guy who became like a
Ruben?
yeah, Dave Rubin was one of
I was gonna
those.
say the whole Young Turks at this point, actually, but
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is like Dave Rubin did it, and then they were like, "Shit, we got to follow." I mean, but that's what I'm saying, right? Is like, and this is why,
I
like,
mean, Jank and Anna are like completely like they're
off
completely
the
lost.
rails,
Yeah,
off the fucking rails.
especially like before the election, definitely after the election. There was nothing of value to be overturned on their show.
Oh my gosh, it's just so I don't know. I guess maybe Tulsi and RFK are like, if supposing they make it to confirmation,
Sure.
might be the most successful of the grifters to exit that class, but
Yeah, I if I had to put money on it, I'd probably go. I think RFK is more likely than not to be confirmed. I think Tulsi might be as well, but I can see like it could hit a point where like there's just she's a problematic individual, and I don't think like I just don't think she has a lot of public support or anything like that. I don't think anyone's going to see a lot of value in having her there, but she could still make it through the process. I'm not sure. I don't think Trump would really go to bat for her either, to be honest. Beyond simply just nominating her and letting her fend for herself.
yeah, and I think like the rumors are always that like these highly online like podcast scene or like Twitter scene
Yeah.
conservatives are coming from the mouth of DJ TJ rather than Trump himself, obviously.
Yeah,
Um,
I think there's probably some truth to that.
so that, I mean that's what I'm curious about is, do all the people from the online or podcast circuit translate into anything meaningfully for the administration? We will wait and see.
Yeah, and I was, there was another bit I was thinking about with it that like it's again, it kind of connects to that podcast space, and then maybe we can talk about more of the second two as well. But it just, I don't really know. Like, it's like this cabinet is like it's all bad. It's all over the place. Like, it's bad and unique in different ways. It's just.
So Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote about a team of rivals. This is just a team
Yeah.
of people stripping it for copper wire. That's really what this is.
Yeah, that really is what it is, and I know that they. Oh, that was what it was. Fucking Rence Priebus was on like a
He's
morning.
alive?
I'm not convinced. I've seen him speak. I'm not sold that he's actually alive. Um, so he was on ABC. They had like a roundtable discussion, and he was talking about, and like, I mean, speaking of deeply uncharismatic individuals, I don't know how he ever was the chair of the RNC. Um, but like he was just talking about like, oh well, Trump really loves a fight and whatnot, and so he's of course going to get all these picks in. And as I said, like I'm not convinced he's going to really fight for too many of these folks. Some of them I think he will, like, but I don't think he's going to like he's not going to turn everything into a battle. He's going to leave them to their own devices to fight their own wars for him. Um, but there was a journalist that was there who had said like, well, like that didn't work out for like when you were his chief of staff on Obamacare. He's like, oh yeah, that's true, and like you could like literally like just like hear like the frowny face in his voice, like just that like yeah, I'm a failure. We didn't accomplish a fraction of what we promised, and just like it's so weird. Like I again like one of like those early Trump castoffs who was fired. He didn't quit. He was fired, and yet still has to pontificate, has to still kiss the ring, even though there's no reward in it for him anymore.
It would be at least respectable if these guys would do the Lincoln Project shtick, and even that grift dried up monumentally.
Dude,
But
I don't know how. I don't know where that group gets its money. Like, is it just like country club Republicans who are like, hey, I want to like feel nice about the future, but I don't really want to like do anything?
I I don't know, because again, like, all, especially when we talk about that limited cohort that gets to have the most say in the electoral process, right? And I'm not talking about the legislators that vote. I'm talking about the people they trade money with, right? Like, their motivations and thought process has never made sense to me, because I always tried to, especially when I was younger, I tried to approach the world with a assume people mean what they say
Sure.
mentality, which got me in trouble more than I would like to admit. But at the same
I
time, like,
really have some candy in the back of the van, Audie.
I would. You don't have a van. Wait a minute. But like, the thing is like, when you don't do that, people get upset. They accuse you of actually being disingenuous or throwing the discussion or being uncivil. But they never give you a reason to trust them in the first place. So I don't understand, one, who funds them, but I also don't understand what they gain from it other than fulfilling the fantasy for that cohort of Democrats that wants to believe the quote unquote story.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. Okay, worst of the bunch. I have been dreading this all night. Gotta get through this. The new Doge, the Department of
Yes.
Governmental Efficiency.
Yes.
I gagged a little bit.
Yeah,
Elon and Vivek.
so as I said, the kitchen cabinet for the 21st century. Obviously there's maybe the Jackson Trump parallels to begin with. Um and it's obviously, sort of paradoxically, right? It's a government department about efficiency, right? I mean, I'm sure they've cracked a million jokes about it. It's a stupid meme name, but it also doesn't exist in any official capacity. This is like the silliest, most unserious thing I've ever seen proposed by a government. And like, and again, it sort of also kind of gets back to like this common theme throughout this episode, right? There are real issues tied to government spending, how it's spent, to the efficiency of government. But because we've given it a stupid meme department name, because this stupid meme quote unquote department wants to cut things like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and isn't really concerned with like anything serious, um,
Exactly.
it completely undermines the issue. It has taken, kind of like the same with those other issues. It has taken issue ownership into the hands of people who have no serious interest in solving anything, just making, basically kind of like, in an ideal form, right? This is basically like the de-Sovietification of like the United States is basically what they would want, right? If this
Mm.
was a formal department that can do stuff, basically what they would be looking to do is just sectioning off, basically just selling out parts of the government to the highest bidder, more or less.
And the
To
specific
pay,
parts are like the Great Society, New Deal, like
yeah,
parts of the U.S. state.
yeah, and just like basically like how can we chip this away? And when I say the highest bidder, I mean like we're gonna sell it to like for pennies on the dollar, mind you, right? It's not to like make the government money or anything like that. It's to like how can we like off-road and privatize as much of the government as possible would be their overall objective. They're not a real department. They're an advisory board, despite however many little X threads Elon wants to start about like, oh, just if you shoot us a message on here, we'll totally respond to it and we'll factor in your ideas about government efficiency. Which again, like I mean, offloading any of that onto like the general American public, who, as we've discussed, has no real like political skin in the game. or like understanding of ideology or processes or anything like that. Yeah, this is just all problematic. It's sort of another aspect to which, Elon Musk has established himself as, the number one oligarch on the planet, right? He has spent billions to get his way here. He can get private meetings with Trump. Apparently, he's in every Trump meeting, can have private meetings with other world leaders. Kind of as it relates to the broader discussion of this cabinet picks thing, has vowed to spend money to unseat Republicans who vote no on any cabinet pick. Like, this is just like someone who has kind of bought his way into the system and wants to use his influence to craft this system in a way that will benefit him and exclusively him, right? Let's cut any regulations on anything he wants to do. Let's, maximize subsidies for his, corporations and whatnot. That's just kind of where we are. Vivek, obviously, also another ghoul. I'll let you dig into him more if you want.
What can be said about Vivek Ramaswamy that hasn't been already been said on this program? On the one hand, I do find it funny that like Doge is just going to be a make work program for these two freaks.
Oh yeah,
but it's entirely worrisome that like these like rabid, highly online, like just fundamentally unwell like members of the Trump camp, right, are going to have a platform to articulate and experiment with the worst excesses of neoliberal thought and just like the libertarian small L, or sorry, I guess which is the American kind, the capital L or the small L libertarian? Let's say small L libertarian.
Well, capital right? L would be the party.
Yeah, okay, so let's call it capital L. Let's call it capital L libertarianism, right? It's their chance to articulate and experiment with it down to like you said, just wanting to unseat people who say no. Like that is insane. And I would love this to at least translate into Musk finally making it absolutely clear to the world he's the biggest fucking idiot, because I'm so tired. I'm frustrated with the amount of quote unquote educated people who think that this guy's a genius, who think this guy's onto something, who think he's a business like magnate, who bought the entire myth. I would like to see him fail so spectacularly in a manner he hasn't already, and it's finally like no longer up for dispute that the emperor is naked and he has no clothes. And all of you guys were in on it, and you were pretending he had clothes on. I would love to see that happen societally.
That's do I think that'll happen? I'm a little skeptical, but
I'm living on the prayer that it happens. That's me.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's just, I mean,
is he a big Ayn Rand guy? Like, does Musk like jack off to Ayn Rand? Is that his thing, or does he not even know what that is?
That's a good question. I actually would lean towards him not knowing.
That would be the funniest. That's probably true because it's funny. Like,
I'm looking it up. I'm finding modern Ayn Rand characters. Elon Musk. That's like Elon. I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, here we go. Elon Musk. Sounding a lot like an Ayn Rand novel and this essay.
Oh, machine stuff.
Not California ideology.
What's he responding to?
I probably won't be able to access, because this is the thing I wanted to say at the start. The new Twitter will not let you look at tweets if you don't have
okay, so he was responding to Matt Walsh. Train derailment, supply chain crisis, planes falling apart in the sky, ships crashing into bridges. I don't know the cause of this latest catastrophe, but the overall picture is quite bleak. So again, it's all the same thing this entire episode. people who see problems that are real and they subscribe the wrong solution.
Every fucking time. It, in some way, right? I was recommended to read the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, if you ever heard of this text.
Is this the one I'm thinking?
Yeah. So this was the essay by Karl Marx.
This is like where he's like kind of like reflecting that. Is this the one where he's reflecting that like this is the disappointing Napoleon?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, specifically, like this is the quote that gets like both said a lot as well as misquoted. So the first is tragedy, then as farce, comes from this
Yes.
essay. And I would implore our listeners or just anyone who's like trying to make sense of this period, like, you know, if you would like a little bit of an escape, but something that can set you up or at least give you some inspiration, just give this one a listen. Like you'll probably find a free audiobook for it. You'll find a free book for it. But it's him like Marx is talking about Napoleon's his nephew.
It's Napoleon the Third. Yeah, it's this
Yeah,
nephew.
so his nephew and the process in which he consolidates power to become emperor of the Second French Republic, right? And turns it into the Second French Empire. And he's talking about, you know, I'll read the quote from Wikipedia. How capitalism and class struggle created conditions which enabled a grotesque mediocrity to play the hero's parts. If that sounds familiar, it's probably because it is. But there's a quote in there too that someone was elucidating, and I think it sums up not only that period but this one perfectly. Which is why, you know, as we look at the death of liberalism, we have to re-examine its birth and its afterbirth, which is the Napoleonic period, I guess. And the quote is, he's talking about capitalism and like the emergence of liberalism. And he describes it as forsaking the crown for the purse.
Mm.
And in the same way, you could kind of view this new neoliberal turn we're undergoing in the same lens, right? Forgoing the crown for the purse, forgoing the institutions
Yeah.
in the name of profit, forgoing
The national identity in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
profit, right?
Exactly.
You know, and you know, we were talking about. Like, I was kind of thinking of this, like thinking back to the, you know, the lack of a promise for the future, right? And
Yeah.
you know, I don't even think like, you know, there's not a vision of like this cohesive like American unit, right? It's just like how can you reclaim that like lifestyle that either you lost or that your parents or grandparents had that you never got to experience.
Right.
Not so much in the lens of like, you know, to an extent you want like the country as a whole to be in that position, but you know, not necessarily, you know, it's more individually focused, I think now.
Exactly. I kind of don't know how to sum this one up. It's been good to be back. It's been good to talk to you about all this. Like this has been a great one to do, but shit. I don't know how else to talk about like I think maybe I know what I wanted to say. So it's like when I first started the podcast, this was like in response to January 6th and the aftermath of the pandemic and highly online influences on political discourse and the kind of failures of liberal thought and all this stuff, right? And we came up with this hokey slogan of greenhouse gaslighting, first as a pun and then as a way in which people will reason themselves out of reality in the name of something else. And in that sense, it's kind of crazy how what started as a response to the impact of Trump is now going to have to do the inverse. And I don't know what to expect for the show and how we go about any of this moving forward. This is completely uncharted territory.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was thinking about that too. That like that was when you formed this. And this seems a little unrelated at first, but I was the other day I was in my office, kind of packing up and putting out a few more books. I had
Mhm.
another box to bring, and in it I had the Amanda Gorman inaugural poem in there.
Wow.
And I was like, like, and I was like, whatever, I'll sit down and read it for a second. And like, gosh, I have nothing bad to say about the poem itself, but man, is it an encapsulation of like that exact mentality in the aftermath of the 2020 election, right? The idea that, and I think it really like highlights, the idea that we overcame, these awful baser instincts as a people, right? That 2016 was a fluke. It was the failure of an institutional design, and now we can begin the path to rebuild, reconcile, and recover. Right there in the end, right?
Yep.
And it's like wow. And I remember, I think Chapo did the thing where they did like all of the stuff, like all the media heads were like, "Oh, you'll never have to hear from Trump again. You'll never see him again." And it's like, wow, not only did we like was that all like bullshit, but also, man, did we like not only did we like, it wasn't an institutional trap that like we, failed to address, which we should have addressed before. It's that we um openly embraced everything that we had thought we had escaped from.
If I was another podcast, I would probably have, stolen the ending for the Blowback podcast to cap things off, but it's too perfect. It's way too fucking perfect. Like this is the type of poetic injustice you'd see in the Bible. I don't know how else to describe it.
What sin are we being punished for this time?
I would say pride. I really think the sin
Sure.
that the Democratic Party in particular will be punished for is pride. Um,
And we're all here to suffer along with them.
I mean, I don't know, like that. Those seem to be America's two big sins: pride and greed.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't have incoherent politics. I have coherent politics, and those drive me not towards action. Those drive me towards trying to figure things out and observe. Is that my weakness? I don't know.
I thought you were gonna say they drive you to screaming into your pillow at night, but
I'm less of a pillow screamer. I'm more of a just like a just lay like that meme of the horse looking at the sea, going like,
yeah.
"Man, that's me. That's usually me." But I mean, I don't know, because like there, in a way, there's a kind of bizarre. I wouldn't call it relief because there's nothing to be relieved about. But in some sense, what I was preparing for, and I said this in the last episode, and I still feel this way. It's like I was completely prepared for the Democrats to win and learn all the wrong lessons. I
But were
was
you
not
prepared for them to
prepared.
lose and learn all the wrong lessons?
That I was not. That I was not.
I mean, we'll see what what they learn. I'm not. I think there's definitely like there's people in the party that I like kind of have some faith in, but there's a lot that I don't, and I don't know who's gonna win, and I don't really want to hope either. You know what I mean?
I mean,
I'm
the
afraid to
DNC
hope
leader
on
race
this
is going on,
front.
right? Like who's in the running for
Yeah,
DNC chair? Because I don't
was
have a lot of faith
shocked.
in these people.
I think is it what's his name? Ben. Wickler? I was shocked, like, because he was someone I thought was one of the better picks. He's the current chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party. Um, and of all people, the third way backed him.
Interesting.
And I was like, really? Like, I'm like, maybe they've learned something. You've got your boy right there in the middle.
Martin O'Malley, martino'malley.com.
Ken Martin from Minnesota might not be bad either. I think like, yeah, I mean, I think those are people who have a better sense of how to like, you know, campaign
Mallory
and also
McMorrow publicly expressed interest. Interesting.
I
Beto
thought that was weird
O'Rourke.
because I saw her as like a contender. Beto shouldn't. I don't think Beto should touch it.
Beto, Max Rose, Faiz Shakir. I mean, made an ass of himself in 2020. I don't know why he would get.
I don't think anyone who was involved with Bernie's 2020 campaign should be allowed anywhere near politics.
Exactly.
Like,
and then this is another potential. The former president of Emily's List is also a crazy pick. If she chooses to come in.
those are all the declined.
But then I'm just looking at some of these too. These are also just weird picks. Like Chuck Rocha was like Bernie Sanders' 2020 Latino vote candidate, like consultant.
Well, you can see why he would be like someone that they were like interested in, maybe because that is where they're losing, right? Is
which is again like the people. Chapo was talking about this in their election breakdown, where it's like, how do you go from like major Latino support in the 2020 primary with Bernie to then losing it suddenly? But that's above my pay grade.
To be fair, I always kind of felt that too much was made out of Sanders' primary Latino support, where like I don't necessarily know that would have translated to the general election, and I think people assuming it are not necessarily correct. Like I think it's fair to be optimistic, but I think that like I think it's an apples to oranges thing. I really do.
I think whatever your initial thoughts are on Bernie in 2020, his decision to sit in the DNC cuck chair, I think, needs to factor into your analysis. That's my only take on all this. Would that support have translated differently had he chosen to sit outside the Democratic caucus? I really don't know. I don't know if it would have made a difference, but I think you're spot on where it's like one election results cannot predict trends, especially these days.
Especially when it's like it's a different level too,
Yeah.
right? Like a primary race is completely different from when like, especially when the other side doesn't even have a primary.
And Nevada has like a closed like it was a closed primary or something, right?
Nevada has a caucus.
It was a caucus. I knew it was something weird.
Or no, Nevada has both. That's why it's weird.
Oh no.
I was like, wait, no. It does have, because I remember the most recent one, which I mean, God, what a fucking boring ass primary to teach through. I mean, man, was I like excited for that? And it's just like, I mean, like the most interesting bit of commentary is a student asking me, like, after DeSantis had dropped out, like, the fact that like all those people still voted for him, are they idiots? I was like, yes.
Shit.
Like, yeah.
Oh no. I'm just looking through like the endorsements here for the current DNC chairs. It's still looking like insiders. But yeah, okay, so Ben Wickler, Robert Reich, Tammy Baldwin, Premier Jayapal, Glenmore, Mark. Okay, so you got a couple of the progressive caucus in there.
Also from Wisconsin, where he's from.
There you go. There you go. So,
I was like, you have.
If you don't have anyone from your state endorse you, that's crazy.
Right.
progressive change and third way. That's actually bizarre.
Yeah, as I said, like, and one of my friends had like messaged me about that. Is like, has like Trump like dragged the Overton window so far to the right that the third way is left wing? And
That's
I'm like,
that's funny. That's funny.
I'm like, I'm like, I'd hate to admit that that's true, but it could be.
That is weird though. You got Robert Reich, Third Way, and then you have John Favreau from Pod Save America and Michelle Goldberg and Jennifer Rubin. That's insane.
Yeah,
And then, Rahm Emanuel declined to run, endorsed by David Axelrod. Oh my god, y'all are
I didn't
funny.
know that he had declined, to be honest. Because I thought that was like, and I know some people were just like, oh, I just want to go full acceleration, so let's get Rahm Emanuel. And I'm like, there's no value in.
I think Rahm
in that.
Emanuel one knows where his bread is buttered and like gets more money as whatever crazy lobbying thing he does.
Right. He is better served by himself and everyone for him to like just never appear in the public limelight ever again.
Exactly. But David Axelrod just coming out of nowhere to endorse Rahm Emanuel, that's classic. That's oh my god.
Right, yeah, like just
That's classic. You don't see that anymore. Yeah. Man, friendship really is real. Isn't that amazing? Okay, we were able to find a positive note.
I mean, I guess, if you want something a little more hopeful, I was gonna say, I came out of election night um more angry than depressed and like deeply angry, right?
Hmm.
Like just very destructively angry. But I think, I there's some people I would credit in my life without, going into details that like I think have put me in a much better place mentally just
That's
having,
good.
you know, the interpersonal relationship with them that I do that
Hmm.
has helped, me kind of stay myself in all of this or like kind of regain that sense of self where I was like just full on like I mean even day after the election like because I taught that day I was like full Sith Lord and advice to some people. I told one person to use their hate. Uh, like
Good.
that was like
Good.
and I still I would still stand by that. And in fact, I do owe that person, a fair bit, in a lot of ways. But I think that, like, more productively using, you know, that anger and animosity, to more positive ends rather than, being, going the CEO shooter route, right? Of, he's not gonna, he got some internet fame for a day. Well, and maybe more like a week, but that's not going to systemically change healthcare in this country. And I don't think that I would encourage you to consider similar acts. Um, Not just because that would legally put us liable for some stuff, but also because I think that it's not productive in terms of achieving our broader goals.
More broadly, Trotsky and Lenin both agreed terror is not useful. So there's my appeal to authority for
Unless
the
it's
day.
on the right people. I'm just kidding.
Oops.
Yeah.
No, but that's so real,
Choose your
man.
targets
Because
well. No, I'm just kidding.
that is so real though. Because like that sense of self being lost after like something big like that happens. That's happened to me several times, and I
Yeah.
think like you could probably point to specific episodes where if I didn't go through it, I was going through that. And that is something that I would at least resolve to try to work on in the new year, right? Is like, how do you build resiliency to this new set of very trying times? How do you build a sense of self that can kind of weather these storms? That's something I'm interested in working on more, and it's reassuring that I'm not the only one dealing with that problem, but knowing that, then I think like it's weird because like people think hear sense of self and they think that has to do with individualism, but I think it has more to do with like because we talk so much about like developing your analysis, holding on to your experiences and using them to articulate not only your values but then also like your vision of change for the world, right? You can't really do that if your sense of self breaks often. So
And
that's
when I say sense of self, I mean I mean it on like a in a holistic sense, right? I'm talking about it in like kind of like who we are as people. I don't mean it
yeah,
in like a selfish like sense. Like I mean like I've been you know honestly more so than I was in college, a much more optimistic individual. Generally, um, which is a marvel considering what I do for a living. Um, which shortly before the election, another little side note. I had given a presentation on some of my Trump-related research, and there
mhm.
was a faculty member from another department that was like, "So, like, do you do like yoga or any other rituals to like kind of like center yourself? Like, how do you like stay sane?" And it was like, I kind of hate when people ask me like advice like that because I'm like, I've got nothing to tell you. Like, I just was like, I just, I find things that I enjoy in life, and like, I mean, I don't know if that's like really like the key to it. I mean, I had someone ask me at a conference, like, how do I get better at like, how'd you get like good at like public speaking? And I was like, I've never been bad, in my mind, but I'm like, I'm like, he's like, do you just practice? I was like, yeah, let's go with that. Like, it's just there's certain things where I'm like, I don't really have a great way to like dissect that for you, but like, we all have different things that works for us. And
Yeah,
as I said, I kind of like found support in this in a weird roundabout way that I didn't expect. But it's worked for me, I guess. And um yeah, I mean, like if I'll say like when I say like how contrasted I was like in the immediate aftermath of the election compared to like now. Um, it's a good thing that we waited like a week or two before we recorded that first episode
yeah.
because the tone would have been completely different, at least on my end.
I was joking where it's like Josh Maoist are confirmed, and like I it's
I
like again.
mean, that might have been a little moderate. I'll put it that way. Um,
No, but I mean, again, that frustration is warranted, and like I talked to a lot of people like whose immediate gut reaction was like, "How did this happen?" And like just a visceral outrage at like, "You guys don't see what's going on. Like, how did this happen?" But you know, in some way, like this is a really hokey quote to be for me to end on, but I keep coming back to this when I feel that urge to police or like rationalize my emotions needlessly, which is it's not a measure of health to be well adjusted to a fundamentally sick society. I'd like to
yeah.
see RFK Jr. quote that.
The thing is, I could actually see him quoting it, but like just
You
coming to
do
the
do the
opposite
voice, do the
conclusion.
voice.
Okay, what was the quote again? Just
I'll
write
put
it
it up.
down
I'll
real
put it
quick.
up. I'll put it
All
up.
right.
Here we go.
All right.
Here it is.
Audience, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Oh God, that
That's
was
why
perfect.
we have to remove the vaccines,
Oh
the true disease in this country.
God. Perfect. No notes. No notes. Do you have anything to plug?
Um, no, I don't have anything to plug today. Uh,
This has been another episode of Greenhouse Gaslighting. You know where to find the show notes. Everything's in the description. We're hoping we do this sooner rather than later. I'm hoping this isn't the last one for the year. We'll see. But until next time, dear listeners, take care.